This is a story of a couple good friends who finally get the chance to take an Indian summer hunting trip, but their plans didn't quite work out. Rather, they found themselves caught in the deep woods alone with a steady supply of terror, dread, blood, and death. So stay tuned for this gruesome affair, The Dead Man at Indian Summer. Finding yourself in the talons of an owl and the shadows of the forest moonlight, it's a gruesome affair. Dean and I had met in college. We both were studying economics, so we naturally had many of the same classes. After a time, I began to notice him and decided to strike up a friendship. To our surprise, it continued to last even after our university days were long over. We both were employed at firms across the street from each other. We had lunch every Wednesday, and more often than not, I would head over to his house for Sunday supper with him and his wife, Janice. The other thing we bonded over, besides our career choice, was hunting. Every October, when Indian summer was at its peak, we would head up to a cabin, which we dubbed the same name, in the mountains that had belonged to Dean's father, and stay there for a week or so, stalking deer during the day and drinking beer all night. It was a hell of a time and a great excuse to get out and enjoy the last of the nice weather before winter really rolled in. Unfortunately, however, it had been a few years since we'd been up. 3 years before, a heavy early snowstorm had made the roads impassable. 2 years before, our work schedules had been too hectic. And 1 year before, Janice had twisted her leg after tripping over a rock while she was jogging on a trail. It had taken a few hours before anyone had found her. Dean had wanted to stay behind and help her recuperate, and I couldn't blame him for that. That year, it looked like it was shaping up to be the exact same thing. In mid-September, Dean's firm had decided to take on a large client only a few weeks before the usual time the mythical trip up to Indian summer took place. There was a lot of bookkeeping to do, which meant long hours and probably no time off. I had resigned myself to another year without hunting when I called over for Sunday dinner as usual on a dark, early October night. Janice pulled out all the stops, laying out the table with fried chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered corn, and gravy. I knew some big news was coming. Janice never cooked that hard unless an anvil was about to be dropped. I sighed and leaned back in my chair. She smiled at me. "Liked it, huh? I hope you're not too full. I've got pumpkin pie for dessert." I looked at Dean and frowned. "Don't think I don't know what this means." He gave a mock look of surprise. "What could that be?" "You can't make this hunting trip this year. We're going to have to cancel again. You made Janice cook all this, so I wouldn't feel so bad." He laughed. "Actually, friendo, that's just the opposite. It took 12 shifts over the past 2 weeks, but I was able to get all the shit for the new company done. For the first time in 4 years, Indian summer is officially a go." I almost spit out the beer I had been drinking. "Wait, what? No, you're joking." Dean clapped me on the back. Why would I joke about something so sacred, such an important part of our year? I shot him a look, grinning. "You mean like how it was so important the past 4 years?" Janice walked through the door carrying the pie. "Hey, it's not like I asked to twist my ankle. And last time I checked, Dean doesn't have control over the weather or his workload." Dean sighed. "Well, no more. Hell, we aren't getting any younger, John. I don't want to miss another year of this." I drained my beer. "It's about time, man. I missed it. So what days are you thinking? I can get time off easy." He thought for a moment before speaking. "Well, how does next Sunday sound? You can get up there by then, right? Although I'm not sure you'll want to." "Of course I want to. What kind of accusation is that?" Janice began cutting slices. "You guys haven't been up there in a while. You're going to spend all of Monday cleaning the place up and making sure the generator works." "A little dirt never hurt anyone. I'm sure I can take it." Dean smiled. "That's good. Now, how about that pie?" I spent most of the next day getting everything ready to head up to the cabin. I made sure my deer tags were renewed and started cleaning my guns, among other things. I could tell that I was so enthusiastic about preparing for this trip because I had missed it so much. Just Dean and I up there in that cabin was one of those things that really reminded you what it meant to have a good friend. Except for a few coworkers I talked to occasionally, I didn't get out much. Dean and Janice were some of the only real friends I had in my entire life, and I was happy to be able to recapture a special event that had disappeared for a few years. I hadn't realized it until then, but something had been missing from my life during that time. I had felt a little less happy, a little less full. Dean and I usually rode up together, but he'd called me on Thursday night and said that we should go up separately. He didn't think one vehicle could hold everything we were bringing. What do you mean? We've gone on this trip before and we've got everything to fit. Yeah, well, we didn't bring as much beer as I'm bringing on this one, and plus, I packed all my carving gear. I want to make sure it's cut right this time instead of leaving it all up there to that cheap-ass butcher. I thought about protesting that. I'd never seen him carve up a deer before deciding to drop it. This was our first trip in years. I didn't want to start it off on the wrong foot. I could spare the extra gas money. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I piled my bags by the garage door and made sure I had everything in place. Licenses for the guns, plenty of changes of clothes in case we had to crawl through mud or something, and a cooler full of beer. Lots and lots of beer. Even though it had been 4 years since I'd been up at the cabin, I knew the way there like the back of my hand. It was about an hour away from my house, up in the mountains. The actual drive there had always been my favorite part. If you set out at just the right time in the evening, you could watch the sunset over the peaks and arrive at the cabin just as the last flicker of light disappeared behind the mountains. The night I set out was no exception. It had been sunny out all day, leaving the entire sky at the mercy of the sunset. As my bags jostled and bumped against each other in the back, I got to see the horizon turn from blue to yellow, yellow to pink, pink to red, and red to purple. By the time the first few stars were coming out, the turn that led to the mountain road was awash in the last few rays of the dying sun. I felt at peace and ready to waste an entire week away. The actual drive up to the mountain took longer than I expected. Whether because no one had used it in 4 years, Dean's car had torn up the thing coming up, or something else. The road seemed rougher and harder to maneuver. By the time I hit the hand-painted sign Dean had put up about 10 years ago that said, "Indian summer is coming your way," the sun had disappeared completely, and darkness was settling in quickly. I went around the last curve and the cabin came into sight. It was just as nice, if not better, than when I remembered seeing it last. A light burned brightly in the kitchen window, no doubt a sign that Dean was cooking up a big meal before we started the cleanup the next morning. His pickup was parked on the dirt driveway outside the front door. I pulled in behind it and shut the engine to my car off, sighed contently. This was going to be a great week. As I stepped out, I considered lugging my bags in through the back door and surprising Dean, but decided against it. I couldn't have carried it all at once even if I tried. Hell, the beer alone would probably take about 2 trips. I walked the path up to the front door, almost knocked, thought better of it, and stepped right inside, letting the door shut behind me. "Dean, I hope you haven't started drinking yet, 'cause I've got enough in the back to choke a..." But I never got to finish my sentence as my voice died in my throat as I entered the kitchen. A large pool of water was seeping around the island and spreading across the floor. The faucet was running on full blast, burbling into an already full sink. On the counter, I could see a plate with 2 steaks on it, though they looked dried out and congealed. A can of seasoning salt beside them had overturned, covering the area beside the sink. Running forward, I stepped through the water and shut the faucet off. "Dean!" I called, stepping out of the kitchen and into the sitting room. The TV was on, displaying an old Friends rerun. Evidently, Dean had gotten the generator to work. A chair was pulled up and a cold ashtray sat on the table beside it. I slowly went from room to room, calling Dean's name and not noticing anything particularly out of the ordinary. I went out onto the front porch and yelled his name out to the trees. But nothing stirred in the darkness. He's probably just gone for a late-night walk, I told myself. I guess he forgot to turn off the faucet or something. Boy, is he going to be mad about the mess. The self-made jokes weren't helping the growing pit in my stomach. Dean never went out for walks this late by himself. After what had happened to Janice on the trail, he was afraid of something like that happening to him. So where was he? As I walked back into the house, I pulled my phone out and called Janice. She answered on the third ring. Hello? Hi, Janice, it's John. Listen, has Dean called you recently? He called about an hour ago, right after he got to the cabin. I was about to ask him when you were going to arrive when he got cut off. I tried calling back a few times, but he didn't answer. I looked around the kitchen and the living room for his phone. There was no sign of it. I thought it was just bad reception. Did something happen? Is he okay? I momentarily considered telling her about the condition of the cabin before deciding against it. There was no need to worry her more than she already appeared to be. Though the validity of the thought was rapidly dwindling, I still tried to think that Dean was all right, and there was a rational explanation. No, everything's fine. I just got here, and I don't see him anywhere. He probably just went for a walk in the woods. There was silence on the other line for a few moments. Are you sure? Dean never goes walking alone. I spent the next few minutes trying to quell the obvious panic forming in Janice's voice. Eventually, I calmed her down and told her I was going out to look for him. Okay, just call me when you find him, please. Will do, Jan. Don't worry. I hung up and leaned against the counter, hanging my head in my hands. This was not shaping up to be the relaxing week I hoped it would be. I grabbed a flashlight from one of the drawers and switched it on. As I walked down the hallway toward the rear of the cabin, I became aware of a banging noise coming from somewhere nearby. When I rounded the corner, I saw the back door was wide open, banging against something as it shook in the wind. It wasn't hitting the frame, though. A hand was outstretched and reaching inside, blocking the door from closing all the way. On the floor, I could see 2 points of light glinting in the gloom. Dean, I called urgently, running down the hall towards the door. As I ran past the glinting objects, I saw they were 2 shell casings lying spent on the carpet. When I pushed open the door, I saw a body laying face down on the back steps, a puddle of dried blood pooled underneath it. Its long, scraggly hair blew in the wind, whipping around its head. It was dressed in a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans. Its feet were coverless and coated in mud and grime. Oh no, I whispered, bending down and turning the body over so it lay face up, the hand still reaching inside, the rest of it looking like it would slide down the steps any second. I felt a sudden, strange urge of relief when I saw that it wasn't Dean. In fact, it wasn't anyone I recognized. I almost recoiled when I caught a glimpse of its face through the hair. It was ashen gray, with a mouth stuck in a rictus grin. Dried blood flecked its lips and had crusted its chin. The eyes had rolled back in the head and looked dry. He had been here for a while. But who was he? I saw the bullet holes in his chest as I looked down. The front of the flannel was soaked with dried blood. What had happened here? Did someone shoot him in the woods and he tried to get to the cabin for help? Did he attack Dean and then got shot by him? If that was so, why hadn't Dean called anyone after it happened? I looked past him to the tree line and the underbrush 10 feet away. Someone, probably the dead man on the steps, had cut a path through the sticks and bushes. I called Dean's name again over the high wind. I received no response. Mulling it over for a minute or two, I decided the path was as good of a place to start looking as any. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you call the police right after you found the body? They could have helped you look for Dean. And while this may be true, I was worried about finding him as soon as possible. If the phone call was anything to go by, about an hour ago, the man had interrupted him at the back door. Something awful, even worse than what could have happened to the man on the steps, probably happened to Dean. I knew he couldn't have gone down the mountain because his truck was still there. He had to be somewhere in the woods. If he was sick or hurt, I couldn't afford to wait an hour or two while the police made their way up. I glanced at the body again, squinting my eyes. Did it look smaller? I leaned in to get a closer look. No, it didn't look smaller. It looked thinner. I was about to inspect it further when I stopped. What was I doing, worrying about this when my friend was somewhere in the woods? This guy was dead. I was sure he wasn't going to go anywhere. I walked around the cabin and back to my car, popping the trunk. I almost reached for my pistol before deciding against it. I wasn't hunting something out there. I was looking for my friend. Just to be on the safe side, I grabbed my hunting knife and slipped it into a pocket in my jacket. If worse really came to worse, I figured that would be sufficient. Going back around, my eyes fell on the steps and I froze, dead in my tracks. The body did look smaller. In fact, it looked like it was thinning right before my eyes. I ran forward, crouching beside the dead man. As I watched, his skin changed from the ashen gray to a moldy green. The muscle and fat seemed to melt off his bones, tightening around them, giving his whole appearance a skeletal look. His blood-stained smile grew wider as his facial features began rotting off, melting away until nothing but a grinning skull remained. The flannel and jeans ballooned around him as the body that was filling it wasted away. The bones themselves turned from blood-stained red to white to gray. They began crumbling, falling to dust until there was nothing but a pile of ash vaguely in the shape of a human left. The wind picked up some of the pieces, blowing them away through the underbrush and trees. I gagged, putting my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the bile. I had no idea what I had just witnessed, but I didn't want to be a part of it. Even if Dean was lying somewhere in the woods with his foot in a bear trap or something, he'd just have to wait. People usually survive that kind of thing, right? I jumped to my feet and was about to run back around the cabin to my car when an ear-splitting scream erupted from somewhere in the darkness. Whipping around, I realized with mounting terror that I recognized the voice. It belonged to Dean. That realization broke me out of my cowardly dash for self-safety. What was I thinking? He had been my best friend for more than 20 years. Was I really going to run away and let whatever was out there do what it wanted to him? I ran back to the steps as the wind picked up the remains, sending them across the yard in a noxious cloud. I wasn't sure in what direction the scream had come from, but I imagined being in the woods would make it easier to track than waiting in the clearing for another sound to guide the way. I figured, since it was already there, the cut path of broken branches was as good a place to start as any. Fishing the flashlight out of my pocket, I held it up in front of me to guide the way as I stepped past the tree line. The underbrush started out fairly passable, but as minutes ticked by, I found it harder and harder to pass. The bushes grew from about the height of my ankles to almost up to my waist. I had to kick them out of the way as I progressed, slowly but surely. In addition, I had to keep the flashlight steady and listen carefully for any noise that could point me in the direction of where Dean was. The wind rattled the branches far above, making them clatter against one another. The sounds were making it harder to pick out anything that might not just be the ambient noises of the forest. At one point, twigs snapped and something darted across the path in front of me, but I saw that it was just a deer. I had been walking for about 10 minutes, aimlessly, following the path that only might lead to where Dean was before the dawning hopelessly set in. Did I reasonably expect to be able to find him in these woods all by myself? The forest was countless miles long and almost twice as wide. It covered most of the mountain the cabin was on. Dean's screams could have come from anywhere. The least I could be sure of was that the dead man had come from this direction. Would Dean have actually followed the path taken by the man that had attacked him? Of course not. Now, convinced the search for my friend was going to turn out fruitless, I resigned myself to the fact that I would just have to call the police and wait for hours for them to get up there, while somewhere in the woods, Dean was probably hurt and... My train of thought was shattered by my hunting boot kicking something metallic that had been lying in the path, sending it flying into the underbrush. I almost cried out in shock as the ringing noises echoed off the trees. I walked to the spot where it had landed and peeked through the leaves to see what it was. It was a pistol, slightly dirty and losing its sheen from being stuck in the earth on the path. I picked it up and inspected the handle. Scratched on the side of the grip were the initials DN. I pulled out the magazine. 2 bullets were missing. He had to be somewhere nearby. I began calling his name again, charging forward on the path. The wind decided to pick up then, sending the branches above into a fury as they tossed this way and that. They crunched under my feet as I ran, heedless of what was in front of me. I became aware of another sound, one that took me a few minutes to recognize, probably because it was identical and being drowned out by the sound I was making. I wasn't the only one breaking sticks as I ran in these woods. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. The snapping noises began to die away, becoming only frequent bursts. Despite this, they appeared to be getting louder. A chill racked across my body, and I reached into my pocket of my jacket for my hunting knife. I tried to rationalize it. At worst, it was probably just another deer. Maybe it wasn't even anything alive at all. The wind was blowing pretty hard. It was probably just the sticks were snapping because they were hitting the ground at such a fast rate. That seemed as logical an explanation as... All of these attempts to rationalize it flew out the window as a face suddenly appeared in the beam of my flashlight up ahead. I cried out, stumbling backwards and accidentally dropping the pistol. It landed somewhere in the brush that I couldn't see. The face was an ashen gray, same as the dead man's. It had the same rictus smile and scraggly hair, though it lacked the blood that had stained his lips and chin. The eyes were not rolled back either, but instead bulged out of the skull, bloodshot and tinted yellow, like a pair of light bulbs. It was wearing a jacket similar to my own, and a ball cap was perched on top of its head. It was Dean. The wind chose that moment to die down, disappearing completely as if by magic. The other noises of the forest, from the night birds to the deer to the grasshoppers and frogs, ceased all at once. I struggled to form words as the panic began to set in. "Dean, is that you, man? Are you feeling all right?" It was a stupid question, I know, because he was obviously very much not all right, but it was the only thing I could think to say. Dean exhaled a ragged breath, fists tightening at his sides. His head moved around slightly, eyes pivoting towards any sort of movement. He was acting like a startled animal. While I spoke, I began to back away slowly. "I got to the cabin a few hours ago, and you weren't there. I came out here to find you, and I guess I did." His eyes showed no understanding of what I was saying. "I'm just going to head back to the cabin now and call someone. You can follow me if you want, but if you don't feel like it, just don't go too far, okay?" I was talking less for Dean's benefit and more for my own. The pit in my stomach felt like it had expanded to the size of a hot air balloon. Dean's face began to disappear back into the darkness as the flashlight beam was slowly taken off it. He was twitching again, mumbling to himself, and moving his fingers. As the light went off his form completely, I saw that his eyes still glowed in the gloom, all red and yellow. He didn't appear to be moving towards me, but then again, he wasn't retreating either. Carefully, I slowly turned around so my back was to him. I began to creep along the path towards the cabin, trying to step over any rocks and sticks that might have made noise. Everything seemed like it was okay. I didn't know what the hell had happened to my friend, but at least I had a plan. I would go back to the cabin and call the police. They would know what to do. Just as the last thought crossed my mind, I stepped on an unseen branch that was hidden under a bed of pine needles. The cracking noise it made echoed through the silent forest like a gunshot. From behind me, I heard an impossibly loud, guttural shriek, followed by the snapping twigs as the thing that used to be my friend behind me closed in. I took off like a rocket, swatting branches this way and that way as I ran. A few of them hit me in the face and chest, almost throwing me off balance. I tried to do the math in my head. If it had taken me 10 minutes by walking, I could be back at the cabin in a few minutes at most. Although I was fast, Dean was faster. The sound of him behind me grew louder and louder as the path began to thin out, signaling the clearing was nearly in sight. Just as I caught a glimpse of the back door through the trees, I felt a hand launch out and slash at my back with its fingernails grabbing onto my jacket. I reached into the other pockets for the knife and brought it out, swinging it wildly behind me. Dean yelped in pain and let go, stumbling backwards and landed in the bushes. I picked up my pace and dove into the clearing, nearly rolling over as I cleared the tree line. Scrambling to my feet, I launched towards the steps, hands outstretched for the knob. It was the wind that sealed my fate. If it hadn't decided to die down while we were in the woods, the dead man's clothes probably would have been blown into the yard. But all was silent and still as Dean chased me back to the cabin, and they were still there on the steps when I made my frantic flight up them. My foot slid out from under the flannel shirt, sending me down to my stomach. I landed hard on the concrete steps, hitting my chin on the top one and clacking my teeth against my tongue hard enough to draw blood. The knife clattered out of my hand and rolled down a few stairs. Groaning, I didn't even have time to try and get up before I felt Dean's weight on top of me and his snarling, gibbering breaths. The concrete scraped against my hands and knees as I wrestled with him, trying to throw him off or, at the very least, flip over. His fingernails raked against my skin and I could feel the drool dripping out of his mouth and pattering on top of me. I managed to turn myself over to face him, only to see his face distort as he dove down, sinking his teeth deep into my shoulder. I screamed in pain as an ice-cold bolt of agony ran down my spine. Dean brought his head back up, and I saw my blood dripping from his mouth. He snarled again, almost in satisfaction, and began trying to pin my arms down. Though he managed to get the left one under my back, he noticed me scooping up the knife that lay on the steps beside us with my right. Just as he dove down again to take a bite out of my bicep, I drew the knife up. With a yell of terror, I plunged it deep into his neck. Dean howled in pain as I pulled the knife out. A jet of blood shot out of the wound and it hit the side of my face. I weakly shoved him off as he slid down the rest of the steps, his movements slower and weaker. The places where he had bitten me burned like fire. I slowly managed to pull myself up to my feet. The world spun in front of my eyes, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. Through the pain and confusion, one coherent thought came through. I needed to call someone. The blood covering my fingers almost made my phone slip out of my hand as I stumbled through the back door and into the cabin. My vision began to blur. The hallway seemed to stretch in front of me like a taffy. I pushed the first number that was already queued up. As the phone buzzed away, my heart seemed to go into overdrive, pumping so hard blood thrummed in my ears. Through the haze, I heard someone pick up on the other line. I wasn't in a place to recognize the voice. "John, thank God you called. Is Dean hurt?" I attempted to slur a few words as it became harder and harder to remain upright. I was knocking into the walls now, sending the pictures hanging on them crashing to the floor. "John, are you there? Are you okay?" All at once, the haze intensified, blurring my line of vision in red. My feet went out from under me and I fell to the floor of the sitting room. The phone landed with a soft thump beside me. "John!" The voice began to say something else, but by then, the Red River had washed me away. Sometime later, a sound pulled me out of the gloom. I tried to close my eyes, but found that I couldn't. I put my gray hands down to the carpet and tried to pull myself up. The noise, I wanted it to stop. It came again, ringing loudly in my ears. I groaned pitifully and tried to put my hands up. Though my eyes were wide open, I couldn't see much. There was one figure outlined in red that appeared to be somewhere ahead of me. The noise was coming from it. A loud, echoing slam ripped through my skull, causing me to almost cry out from the pain. Why was everything so loud? I just wanted it to be quiet. The red figure from behind the walls came closer, climbing up a few steps before it pushed open the front door. Compared to the cacophony of its steps and the creaking door, the voice came almost as a whisper. "John, Dean, honey, is anyone here?" A smile cracked across my face. I had found the source of the noise. Once it was gone, I could get some peace. Its steps echoed in my ears, each sending a gunshot of pain. Just stop it, and I could rest. Rest for as long as I wanted. Grinning, I started down the hallway towards the figure. To my forest friends, thank you for listening to another tale. I hope you enjoy these horrible stories as much as I do. If so, please rip at the like button and scratch a comment. And be sure to subscribe so we can visit here on the Smoking Owl Tales channel next time. And catch you on another night very soon.